In this session, I'm speaking with John Adamus. John, welcome to the Writers Craft Summit.
Oh, Kevin, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So, in this session, we are going to talk about point of view. And as you and I have gone back and forth a little bit on, I think this is an interesting and potentially challenging topic because on the surface, it has the appearance of being fairly simple. And yet, I know as a writing coach myself, and as someone who works with writers in a coach capacity and editorial capacity yourself, I'm sure we've both seen a lot of writers struggling with point of view.
This is a hill I think a lot of people want to die on for no good reason.
And what do you mean by that?
Well, if I may speak candidly,
Please.
the idea, point of view is of course important. There's no way around point of view. You have to have one. It's important. It does sort of organize the majority of the rest of the story you're telling, but at no point in the development process, the editorial process, the publishing process, should it be the thing you want to hang your hat on. It's just another tool in the toolbox. And there are far more important ones that I think get overlooked in place of the novelty or the knowledge of point of view, the ability to say, aha, I know exactly what point of view I'm using. Well, that's delightful, but have you thought about theme or voice or tone or thematic obligations? Have you thought? No, but you know your point of view. So how nice for you. It's an important tool, but it's by no means the singular tool by which your story, whatever story that might be, will be, remembered for all time immemorial.
And I think it's interesting too, because point of view is something that's fairly unique to written fiction.
Yes.
Cinema, it's kind of understood. You got to put the camera somewhere.
Right, exactly. And it's most important in fiction because it's written, because the movie is the thing that exists in our mind. Whereas on film, we sit in the theater, it's very passive, there's the big giant screen, we go stare at it, and we can very clearly see, oh, that's where the camera is. If I'm looking at a distance, the camera's pulled way back. If I'm staring at someone's face, it's super close up. And to mirror that sort of cinematography in fiction is not easy. And for people who have not really sat down and thought about how to do it, because they'll get lost in the weeds of show versus tell, or point of view, or tense, or one of the million things that I'm sure social media and writing will tell you is important. And oh my God, you must fix it right now, right this second. Point of view gets occasionally the short end of the stick, and it really shouldn't.
So let's go on the most basic level. What are we talking about here when we're talking about point of view? What are the options that fiction writers out there watching this, what are the different options that they need to choose from when they're sitting down to write a story or a novel?
Oh, awesome. So first and foremost, there's first person. That uses I, and it's usually the narrator who is the I, and it's usually the protagonist. It's usually the character both telling and living the story. It is independent of tense. I think that is the thing we need to sort of put a little gold star by. It doesn't matter whether we're talking in present tense or past tense. It's that we're using certain pronouns and we're positing our action in certain ways. So first person uses I. I did this. I go to the store. I'm the character in the story. It allows the most access to the character's mindset because what the character is thinking is the exposition of the story. It is most often that sort of, we see it in genre. We see it in things like hard-boiled detective stories. We see it in comics. We see it in sci-fi. We see it in all different places where the reader is meant to be sort of on the character's shoulder and in their brain and seeing and feeling the story as the character sees it. So that's first person. Really common. It's not a bad thing. It's not elementary. It's not juvenile. It's just a choice we can make. Now we can jump to second person. And second person gets a really, it's got a really bad stigma attached to it because most people can only really think of one book that did it successfully. Second person addresses you. So it's the writer speaking to the author as though they're the person standing next to them experiencing this. It's you go to the store, you're on the train, you see the pretty person, you buy a pair of shoes, whatever. The only case in modern fiction people bring up is Jay McInerney's Bright Lights Big City from the 80s. It was a decent movie with Michael J. Fox. The book is better, as is often the case, but it's the only time we really think about a second person story being successful. It gives not as much insight as first person, but it still gives you some access to what they're thinking. And because the narrator, the developer of the story, and the character focus of the story is now separate, whereas in first person it was sort of aligned. It's second person. We've stepped to the left essentially. We get a little bit more flexibility in how we describe a scene. The camera has been removed a little bit. We've got the ability to get around the character and show more of the background, the diorama of things. That's second person. No one really does second person anymore.
Well, for another example, I do know Neil Gaiman has a picture book called, I think it's just called Instructions. But
Yes. Oh, I haven't thought about that.
You walk through the doorway, you see the vines. And obviously, outside of the world of fiction, where you're going to see this a lot is in instructional writing.
Oh, absolutely.
First you do this, then if you want to lose the weight, first you do exercise, then you eat the food, then you do the whatever. So we see it a lot in the nonfiction world, but as you touched on here, we got like kind of maybe one Neil Gaiman book and one novel that did it well in the 80s, but we don't see it a lot.
It's just because it's hard to do consistently, because invariably somebody's going to want to talk about something that can't be next to me. They're going to want to talk about that person over there or something singular to themselves, and it just becomes difficult to maintain. And it also limits what you can describe, because first person is also limited in terms of what I can describe, because if I'm in a room, I can only talk about the things I'm seeing. I can't suddenly jump away to what's happening 2 blocks over on that house over there. Second person is not as limited as that, but you're still fairly limited. We can't sit here in my house and say, you're listening to John talk, and then immediately have perfect ability to teleport 6 blocks away because, oh, somebody else is having dinner. It's about that limitation, and I think that's one of the things that sort of waves people off. Now we can get into the more common ones, because we get into third person, of which there are 2 flavors, although I will argue there's a flavor and a half. So there's third person, and the ways we like to style it are third person limited and third person omniscient. And what limited and omniscient refer to is the amount of information that the reader takes in. It's how much awareness do they have of what other people are thinking, what's happening on sort of the global, I'm making air quotes on an audio, global scale.
No, we're on video. This is on video.
Right, this is video. Oh, excellent. So my air quotes totally work. Thumbs up. Good. So the global scale is omniscience, the idea that the narrator, not necessarily the narrator, but the drafter of the story, the voice of the story, big, booming, James Earl Jones sort of a voice, knows everything. In a lot of Western fiction, this is listed as sort of God mode for fiction. We can get into any character to a great deal of depth, to the same degree. We know what everybody's thinking. We know what everybody's doing. We know everything. That's omniscience. Limited is that scaled back to a few characters. So when we look at something that I'm notorious for talking about on social media, when we talk about MPOV, multiple points of view, a different chapter headlined by a different character, that's third person limited. If we do that for every character under the sun, then that's third person omniscient. Now, my argument, and then I make this argument a lot, is that third person limited is more common and third person omniscient is to be avoided, because you're giving so much information. Just the volume of things to keep straight and keep track of and account for can be overwhelming. It can also be difficult from a writer perspective just to keep all that stuff together. Oh, I've got 15 characters in this chapter. Well, okay, everybody's got to get the same level of detail. I better start writing. And it just slows everything down. Whereas if we limit ourselves, even if we're limiting ourselves to 3 characters or 2 characters or one point of view character in the story around them, that's totally fine. It's not the end of the world just because we're not absolutely in everybody's head to the same degree. And it eliminates the thing that editorially I see all the time, head hopping. That's the danger of sort of third person when we're playing with the amount of omniscience. Well, we're going to tell this from John's perspective. No, we're going to quickly cut away over to Kevin's, and then, oh, we're going to go over to that lady over there's because her perspective somehow has become important to the scene. And I think if there's a slight red flag I could wave for third person, it's to caution the writer against thinking that the reader has to know everything in order to get a picture in their head. I don't think they do.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the challenges of point of view. I think you're absolutely right that going third person limited is probably going to be more effective, but I think for most writers their initial instinct is to go omniscient. And so
absolutely, yes very much so.
Your initial instinct is pulling you as a new writer or a developing writer in the direction that's actually probably going to be least effective for you, but you grew up reading Lord of the Rings, or you haven't thought that much about point of view, or you're worried limiting it to a single character per chapter or whatever is going to be too limiting. But
right, yes. If it's limiting in the sense that, oh well, but I have such a big story, I have such a big plot, I have so many things going on, I want you to see how hard I've worked to come up with all my, look at my outline and my note cards and my piles of progress. I want you to see how good I am and how big this is. So of course I want to give you, open the floodgates and, swim in my story. Limited isn't necessarily bad. Limited is just that you are choosing to be focused, and it's a case of discipline. Okay, I'm going to just stick with these characters for right now. Other characters exist. Other characters are important in different ways, but when I tell you the story, I'm coming at it from this particular vector in this particular lens, and that's not bad. That's really good. That's how you'll get a lot of story across successfully without having to contend with, well, I have all these things behind me I must now bring to the forefront. It's okay to be limited is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that right off the top, you were getting into this idea of genre, because I think certain genres lend themselves to certain points of view. For example, young adult, we often see young adult written in first person.
Absolutely, yes.
And why do you think that is?
For young adults specifically, I think it's because they want to create a bridge between reader and character. Because you want the reader to say, oh, I sympathize. I've been through these situations. I was a young adult once too, I'm also having these same conflicted emotions or experiences in my life, whether it's school or socially or whatever. So by going in first person in YA and middle grade and new adult to some degree, what you're saying is this character is like you. Take note, take solace in what they're doing, see if you agree, see if you disagree, but relate to them on a very intimate level, more so than if we describe them as a very distinct separate thing that's over here away from us. You're building a level of trust that is not as present in second and third person.
So let's talk about that then. Let's go through. We've laid out these kind of 3 or 3.5 different points of view. Let's talk about the benefits, but also the drawbacks of some of them. So you just drew attention to some of the benefits of first person, this immediacy and this connection to the reader. But of course, there's also challenges that first person point of view creates for a writer. So
absolutely,
what are those challenges?
The largest challenge for first person is that the character has to be in the room for something to happen.
Exactly. Which can be really challenging.
Well, I mean, it doesn't mean that the plot has to be small. But if you overdo it, if you try too hard and it gets a little sloppy, it feels like the story is very conveniently only happening when your character walks into a room. Mm-hmm. Like, we've been waiting here. It's like a surprise party. We've been waiting with the lights off and the dark, and all of a sudden the character comes in and we do stuff. And the limitation is the character must be present. Now, in some genre, it's sort of a given that the character is present. You get this in detective fiction. You get this in sort of that problem solver investigator line of genre where it's, well, I'm solving this case. I'm finding these clues. I'm doing the mystery solving myself. So, of course, I'm present when the plot moves forward because I'm the one doing the things that move the plot forward. However, that makes it difficult to talk about, well, what are those two people? I've met A and B 5 scenes ago. If A and B have a conversation over there in another room and I'm not there, I have no idea what A and B talked about until I engage with A or B.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be a significant hurdle for first person.
Yeah, I always think of the example of suspense, because often how we create suspense is by giving the reader more information than the character has. So if a character walks into a room and sits down, and I, as an omniscient narrator, perhaps say, and there was a bomb below the desk, I'm able to build that suspense. But if I'm writing from first person, I can't use that technique of giving the reader more information than the character has, because the reader is going to learn it at the same moment the character, learns it.
Yes, and it's a different kind of tension then. Whereas in third person, when we know the bomb is under the table before the character sits down, we can build up and give that menace of the bomb being this thing that we're rolling towards. But in first person, the suspense, the shock of it is when the bomb goes off. We didn't know it was there, but we feel its consequences. First person is a very consequential point of view because we have to be close to what's happening.
And I think that's one of the big takeaways here about choosing a point of view is it's not that one is better than the other. It's that each have different effects, and you want to choose the one that's going to work best for the story you want to tell.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's always going to be a choice because writing is the act of making decisions. Yeah. So we always want to look for things that will allow us to get our story and get that movie from our brains across the ether into somebody else's head. So if you're looking for connectivity, if you're looking for immediacy, if you're looking for intimacy and relatability between, this fictive character and the reader, first person's a great tool for that.
Yeah. So let's go on to second person. I think the benefit would really be that you're differentiating yourself and doing something really challenging and difficult. It's not something I don't think either of us would really recommend anyone.
I would not tackle. In fiction, no. In fiction, I would not recommend it. Not even for the more confident writer.
Yeah.
Primarily because, well, yes, it's novel, it's big, and it's exciting. Oh, you're doing second person, but at the same time, it's the easiest one to really make a mistake in, and it can be a catastrophic mistake because the minute you shift away from either explicitly saying you somewhere in a sentence or having that you be implied but still clear, we very quickly traveled into third person because the minute you bring in a he. Without understanding how we're framing he to you, the wheels have come off our apple cart. But when it works, you're creating a sense of pacing and you're creating a sense of momentum because it's the reader will feel a sense of tumbling down a flight of stairs. I know that's a terribly graphic way to describe it, but it's this sort of it's a somewhat helpless plunge forward where we're not quite doing it of our own accord and we're just being propelled forward by story. When it's done well. When it's done poorly, it just sounds like your dad is yelling at you for not getting chores done on the weekend. And more often than not, a lot of people don't do it well. It is not something seen a lot in publishing. If you've done it successfully, writer out there, by all means, go give it a shot. I want to hear about it. I want to shout your many praises. But understand that if you're intending to query or pursue this traditionally, you are going to fight an uphill battle because most people go second person. No one does that. And that would be a position I'd hate for people to get into unintentionally.
So if you're watching this and you're feeling overwhelmed about what point of view to choose and you're a fiction author, you can kind of put a pin in that one. Second person, just put it on the shelf. Don't worry about it for now. It's really a decision of whether you're going to go first or whether you're going to go
third. Yeah, second person is that nice sweater that you got for Christmas that you really appreciate. But there's no way you're going to wear it because it's just not really you. But the person was well-intentioned. Yeah. So second person can kind of go over there on our invisible shelf.
So let's talk about third person limited then. What's the benefits here of third person limited? Personally, I would say it's probably the most common perhaps or most mainstream. It's the one I would recommend a beginner writer start with. It's kind of the most common Why would you recommend first?
I would recommend first for
really?
a beginning
Okay.
author. Yeah, because it very simply allows the author to be the character most directly. Just think about what the character would do. Well, I would do this. Well, now you're in first person.
Yeah.
Whereas in third person, we're considering it as, okay, I wish I had a Lego guy at my desk, but I don't. So we'll just use this pen. So all of a sudden now in third person, we're outside the character. Okay, what would this guy do? Well, he'd go around here, he'd do this, he'd do that. Great, that's third person. What is he thinking? To the exclusion of, what is this guy thinking? And all of a sudden now we're limited. Third person limited is far and away the most common, without a doubt, no sweat. It's easy to do. It's familiar. You're going to find a ton of books on the shelf to do it. And it's really easy to do well because all you have to do is just, okay, stay at a distance and then describe the story. Bring the reader in close, bring the reader far away, push and pull them, show and tell. Don't think of them as oppositional enemies. That's probably another lesson in this series. But tell the story, project that story, give them the mental movie as though our character is this other guy over here and we're just going around with them.
Yeah, I think that's why I tend to recommend third limited is because I think of it as the best of all worlds. I think you can get the intimacy of first person, but you're also not so limited. And if you need a scene where you cut away to the antagonist, you can do that, and you can have a chapter from the antagonist third person point of view.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that's really where I think of it as the happy medium. But perhaps that's the drawback as well, is when you're kind of getting the best of all worlds, you're probably not going too deep into all of them either. So you don't have the immediacy of first person or that character connection. And you also don't have the vast scope that Omniscient opens up for you.
Well, it's that limitation in first person, the fact that the character must be present, the fact that we are in the character's head to the exclusion of all else, that helps create that tension. It helps keep us interested because I don't know what's going to happen next. Let's find out. In third person, you've got a bit more writing responsibility to do to lay out that tension because you're seeing a bigger picture. You're seeing more of the field and the diorama. So you have to be more, not necessarily prudent, but be more selective in terms of, okay, I want to talk about this. I want to present that there's a table and I want to say there's a bomb under the table and I want to build at it from a certain way. How would I visualize this? If this were on Netflix and I'm watching it on my couch, what's the picture on the screen? Okay. The camera would be under the table shooting the bomb with a ticking clock, and then the door would open, and then we'd move to the door. And it gives you that sense of laying out the scene in sort of a more fluid way, but at the same time, you're detached from it. And when you don't invite the reader closer through word choice, through sentence structure, through just picking where we're going to put the camera, you can kind of keep the reader at arm's distance for the duration of the story, which makes for a boring story no matter how cool or interesting the elements of the story are. That's the drawback to third person limited. We're a tour guide walking through the museum looking at all the exhibits, but not really close enough to them to feel as though we're connected.
Yeah. So let's dig into Omniscient then. Because I think Omniscient, probably the big drawback we're here is this idea that, I mean, no one said you can't head hop. Virginia Woolf and Mrs. Dalloway head hops all over the place, and it's the most beautiful thing ever written. But it can be very disorienting if it's not masterfully handled, right?
Right. The main problem with head hopping, the reason why everybody throws a big fit about, oh my God, don't head hop, is because people head hop casually. Meaning that if we're following character A and we're using a certain set of if we've got he and she pronouns and we know who the he is and we know who the she is, if all of a sudden we head hop into character B and they also use he and she, there's a possibility that the he character A is talking about is not the same he as character B. Yes, of course there are exceptions. I'm not talking about the exceptions. I'm talking about the idea that by head hopping and radically jumping from characters, especially if we're changing location, I'm over in this room, I'm 2 houses away, we all of a sudden have to get that sort of whiplash of, wait, who's talking? Where are we? What's going on? Oh, okay, I'm in a new place. And it can create this sort of halting momentum because if we head hop without fully building a scene or coming to a natural breaking point in the scene to jump the track all of a sudden. Oh, wait, we've moved. Well, that the prior scene feels unresolved. And that can really lead to a whole series of just unresolved things that we come back to. And maybe if you do it enough times, I sort of forgot what you were doing 6 things ago. I don't really know if I want to stick away with this book. I'm going to go put it down and do something else. And then you've lost the reader. Yeah. That's the danger of head hopping. But when it's done really well, we get the full scope in this beautiful symphony of story where we have a great deal of depth because we know everything that Kevin is thinking. We know everything that John is thinking. We can figure out and see the ways they come together or the way they bounce off each other. And then we can add in extra people. It's just hard.
Yeah. And I think the really cool thing about Omniscient, we often think of it in this context of what Omniscient does is it opens up the ability to know what multiple characters are thinking.
Yes.
I think something that we don't talk about enough is that it also opens up the ability to hop around geographically. We can tell the reader what's going on the other side of the world at the exact moment that one character is doing something here.
Well, that's a good point.
Open up things temporally. I was just revisiting Lord of the Rings, and there's moments where Tolkien will be like, a soldier died on the field. 20 years later, that spot was known as Dead Soldier Row. And then he'll just pop 20 years into the future and then pop back into the regular timeline. And so Omniscient really opens things up in a crazy way where this godlike, all-knowing narrator can really move into people's heads, into people's perspectives, but also across the geography of the story and also through time.
That's really interesting. I hadn't really thought about that. What I want to caution people against, because I will be the caution guy, I guess. Don't feel as though writers don't feel as though you have to master chronology and temporal flow in order to develop that sense of omniscience. Not everything is going to need, all right, I'm referencing this coffee shop. I better talk about what happened 40 years ago. No. You can just have a coffee shop. It's okay. Like, we don't need everything detailed to some incredible exponent. I know this only because I have edited too many things where people wanted to be omniscient. They wanted to show, they had this beautiful idea and they had this great sort of avalanche of material, and they tried so hard to detail everything, and it all ends up getting, not all, the majority of it ends up getting cut because we have to pare it down.
Well, and I think what this whole conference summit is about, like this whole idea of the craft, is almost always about placing limits on ourselves. Like,
absolutely,
that's what genre is. That's what structure is.
Sure.
That's what the POV is. Because when you open up the possibilities, it becomes so overwhelming. So as a writer, I wanted to take the opportunity to point out how cool Omniscient can be, but it's not something I would say, hey, rush into that and go do that. I'm someone who says, let's make this as simple on ourselves as possible. And one of the best ways to simplify is to, choose a limited point of view or even a first-person point of view as opposed to going the opposite direction. It's just cool to know that those options are out there. Should you want to tackle them?
Oh, absolutely. And by all means,
start.
Yeah, by all means, go get them. Go do a second story. Go do a third book. Go do a whatever, and develop that. But even that has limitations because we still have to make the choices. Just because we have the ability to hurtle through time and space and go from planet to planet and character to character and whatever to whatever doesn't mean we have to. So the idea that you're always going to look for some sort of limit, because the minute you say, well, my story is about this and not that, that's a limit. And the minute I want to say my protagonist is a woman, she's 35, all of a sudden now we do not have a male over 65 protagonist. So that's another limit. Limitations are not necessarily negatives or penalties. They're encouragement. They let us know how big the space we're going to play is by saying, well, it stops here. Here's a boundary. Yeah. And it's not that we have to be raptors and constantly test our fences. It's that we just need to know how big the space is so we can play in it.
So I know we don't want to get too deep into the complexities of it here, but I do want to talk a little bit about how point of view can inform the language that the narrator uses. So, for example, in, say, what's the famous American novel written from the perspective of a young girl about racism? How am I forgetting this?
I don't know. There are several.
With Boo Radley, the neighbor.
To Kill a Mockingbird.
Okay, yes, sorry.
It's okay.
So, for example, To Kill a Mockingbird is narrated by, I forget the character. Scout, right? And so it wouldn't make sense if all of a sudden Scout was talking about doing her like taxes or what's
right.
Like what the narrator is able to communicate is limited to what that child knows to some extent, but there's some leeway here.
There is some wiggle room. There is some wiggle room, but that is both a function of character development, because you might have a character. Scout is particularly more precocious than some of the other kids in her school class, for instance. So she has a little bit more flexibility in terms of what she knows, and her relationship with her father and her relationship with her siblings and her peer group gives her that little bit of latitude. So it's not just it's a function of who the character is to some degree, but it's also a function of how do you want to tell this story. Because if I'm going to put on sort of the lens of I'm now a young girl in the South telling the story, we've got a set of boundaries now. All of a sudden, I can't sit around and talk about, well, I believe what's happening in Washington, D.C., because we've got to limit our perspective. We've got to scale that down. So our point of view helps inform us in terms of not so much what we can and can't, in terms of if you talk about this thing, it's bad, but more like you don't have to talk about those 15 other things. We can stay right here in this little lane and define it as we like and build on it as we like. So choosing our words comes down to sentence structure. And would a girl know this? And if a girl says this, if she says it this way, not only does it sound like a girl, which is always important when we're working with dialogue or character, but also does it fit in the story? It might be important. We might want to make, as an author, might make that point about like, yes, racism is bad, you guys, but you can't say it the same way you would as an author as you would in character.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about understanding your concept. Racism is bad, you guys, and Gregory Peck is awesome. So you want to find a different way to express it as the character would.
Yeah, I think on the most simple level, how to understand point of view is kind of this metaphor of where are we placing the camera, right? Whose eyes is the camera looking out of? But once you've kind of established that base understanding, I think we get into what you're talking about is that point of view isn't just about where's the camera, it's about it informs the language that you're going to use.
Yes,
storytelling.
Absolutely. Because if we're in first person, then the camera is the character, right? We see what the camera sees. It's what human beings do. Like I'm watching my hands on the screen, so we are very much first person in this case. If we are suddenly looking at you talking about me, that's second person because you're seeing me from that side of the screen. But if now there is a third person sitting to both of our rights, let's say, well, your right's on that side, so you're right over there, then what they're seeing is third person. So whatever they're seeing is the scope of point of view, but the direction of point of view is, okay, if we're following John, or if we're following Scout, or if we're following this other person over here, we are limited, we are bound by what they know and how they sound, and getting that across helps get into things. It's a gateway. It leads us to discussions of voice and character development and word choice and exposition and sentence structure and paragraph flow and a bajillion other editorial things. But in terms of what point of view can do is it helps focus the story, because you want to pick a point of view that helps serve the idea you're trying to get across. If you're telling a large-scale interstellar war, and you want to show the scope of it, how big it is, billions of planets, tons of aliens, lots of ships, you're probably going to want to be as broad as possible, which means most likely you're going to want third person, because we want to see the thing as big as possible. But the minute we personalize it, the minute we say, I want to show the effects of war on a person, and we zoom into one captain of one ship, and we say, that's my character, I'm going to follow them, that's Kirk, that's Picard, that's whomever, then now we're in first person. And understanding what that's going to mean both story development wise, but also linguistically. If I'm telling Captain Kirk's story and he's the one telling the story, he's going to talk more I, and all the he's will be the people around him, and all the she's will be the people around him, as opposed to Kirk over here on the Enterprise will not know what is happening, two quadrants away on a Thursday at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He's just not able to know that, so we don't have to bring that in.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. This idea that your point of view character is going to play this huge impact on the story that you're telling, in terms of the story that the starship captain experiences is completely different than the story told from the engineer,
Yes.
the engineer whose first journey out into space it is, right? Those are, and the exact same external plot events could happen. But when you're the writer, you're choosing, I'm going to tell the story from the captain's perspective, or I'm going to tell the story from that engineer's perspective.
Right.
It completely change the story that you're ultimately telling, or the emotional experience that the reader is going to go through anyway.
Absolutely. It's all about controlling that emotional experience, and then being able to install that in the reader, having them look at it. You write the sentence going, when you read this sentence, whatever the sentence is, when you read this sentence, I want you to feel sad. And when the reader reads that sentence, they read it and go, oh, I've read this sentence. I feel sad. You've succeeded then in that transmission of information. So when we pick a point of view character, whether it's the engineer or the captain or the historian telling us about the breadth of the journey from some removed thing, we are just always looking for that emotional bridge to the reader, whatever that might be, whether it's factual or sympathy or empathy or negative or whatever. It's about finding the emotional tone you're trying to reach. How do I want you to feel? And then picking the language that allows us to feel those things and evoke those things in people, and then making sure we've put it together in a way where you will feel that. If I pick these 6 words and I string them together, I want you to feel sad. Do you when you read it? That's really the puzzle in writing something.
So, John, as we come to the end here, any final takeaways here that you want the viewers who watch this video, what are the final takeaways that they should take with them when it comes to point of view? What are the kind of core messages you think they need to know?
Okay, first and foremost, you don't have to worry so much. It's really going to be okay. You can pick a point of view and test drive it, and it'll work. And you might find, or you might feel tempted a few revisions from now, a few paragraphs from now, a few chapters from now. Oh man, I should tell this story from a totally different point of view. That might happen. It might not. You don't have to find the perfect point of view to tell your story. Just pick a point of view and ride it as long as it'll take you. And whichever one you pick, stick with it. If you're gonna, do multiple points of view and you've got, every chapter you're gonna switch to a different person, great. Just do that consistently and be really clear when you're in character A that we're with character A, and when we're with B, we're really with B. And if that's not your jam and you want to follow one character all the way through, then do it consistently. And big giant 2 elements. One, it might not work, and that's okay. You just gotta not so much tailor the story you want to tell, but change the way you want to tell it, because your idea is totally valid. You're just trying to describe it to me in a way that's not coming across. But 2, it's fixable, and it's not the be all end all. And it's important. Absolutely, it's important. But it's not really one of those things where after a certain level of publication and querying, you're known as you're the person who writes in first person. No, that's not the thing. You're known as the genre, you're known as the element you write, whatever, but it's a big deal up to a certain point. And I think a lot of people overinflate it and worry about it. And it's not a thing to worry about. It'll be okay. You can fix it. You can change it. You can play around with it. You don't have to worry about getting it 100% accurate. Oh my God, there's all these things and you have to know all of them. No, there's not going to be 100% perfect relay of information, because it's not necessary. And B, you, the author, are not in charge of the reader's mind. So you're not able to get me to remember everything because you're not me. So don't worry about having to get all of it across and all of it 100%. Just pick one, put the lens on, and show the story the way you want it told. Get it across. And if it doesn't work because it runs out of steam after 12 chapters, the first thing to look at, other than, oh no, I can't be telling the story about this kingdom under siege. No, it's not the kingdom's fault. It's that maybe you've picked a way to tell the story that didn't go as far as you want to go. Okay, let's roll it back and see where else we can take it, because the idea of the kingdom under siege is still interesting. It's not the plot's fault that you got a POV wrong. It's just a POV we need to tinker with to get the plot across. Those are the big takeaways for me.
I love it. I mean, this is the thing. The beauty of writing is that we can always fix it. It's until you hit that publish button or drop the query into the mail or whatever, stuff can be revised. So I love this idea of, the big mistake you can make on point of view is not picking one, right?
Right, exactly.
Pick it. Like everything else in writing fiction, it's a series of choices.
Yep.
You got to make them, and then you see whether they work out or not. And if they don't, you fix it. I love it. John, thank you so much for being part of the summit.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much. I love doing stuff like this. This is great.